Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're going to be going over and showing you how to install the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar here on our 2017 Newmar Canyon Star. So here you can see what our sway bar looks like installed. You'll also notice that directly in front of the aftermarket sway bar we have the factory sway bar, which is the great thing about this kit here. It actually allows you to retain the factory sway bar, it doesn't replace it. So in our kit here, we're going to get our actual anti-sway bar, we're going to get our polyurethane bushings, we're going to have the axle brackets, then we have the end links over here, and then finally up above we're going to have our frame brackets. So a couple specs here on the actual anti-sway bar. It's actually going to be 1 5/8 inches diameter. It's going to be made of solid steel, so it is pretty heavy duty and durable. And basically, this thick of a sway bar here, it's going to drastically improve our handling when we're driving out on the road. So a rear anti-sway bar is actually going to be one of the first improvements that you're going to make to your motorhome. It's definitely going to be the most worthwhile one, or in other words, the one you're going to notice most. So what an anti-sway bar actually does is, it basically provides an additional link between the axle and the frame of our vehicle. And what this does is, when we're out driving on the highway, say we get passed by a semi, there's a large gust of wind, or we need to make sort of a tight evasive maneuver, we're going to get what's known as body roll, which is essentially the body of the RV shifting back and forth side to side. And what this does is, since we're bridging the connection between those two, we're providing a much more rigid connection. It's going to minimize the effects that we have when those trucks pass by, because it's going to make us feel much more planted on the road. The body and chassis are going to feel a lot tighter together, minimizing those movements. So with our polyurethane bushings here, a lot of the factory sway bars, they just use a standard rubber bushing, and those are obviously going to wear out over time with both use and weather conditions. With the polyurethane bushings, we're not going to have either of those issues. They carry a lifetime warranty, and everything you see here is going to be made in the USA, so you know you're getting a quality, well-made product. So in regards to installation, this one is actually not that bad. I've installed a couple different of these rear anti-sway bars. Some of them require drilling into the frame, and that really takes the install up to the next step. This one, however, is going to be completely bolt-on. We don't have to do any drilling or modifications. We're going to use 2 pre-drilled holes in the frame, and then we're going to be attaching to the U-bolts here. So it is going to take you a little bit of time. You're going to need maybe some non-standard tools, such as some larger sockets. Most basic mechanic sets, you're probably not going to have those. So you may need to pick up a larger socket set in order to get this installed. But aside from that, everything's pretty straightforward, not too bad at all. So the first step of our installation, we're going to take our frame bracket here. We're going to come to either side of our motorhome, directly behind where our rear wheel is. So we're going to be bolting this onto the frame using some existing holes for the rear cross member. So let's go ahead and get under the RV now so we can show you those. So keep in mind, we do have our RV here on lifts, and that's just to give you guys a little bit of a clearer view of what we're doing. But you can actually install this with your motorhome on the ground. You obviously have your landing gear as well if you need a little bit more room. So now that we're underneath the RV here, so if we look directly behind the rear wheel, we look straight up. If you want to follow these shock absorbers, that's an easy way to find it as well. But we're going to have our rear cross member. So you can see the 2 bolts on the outside of our frame here. We actually need to go ahead and use these because this is what our frame bracket is going to attach to, actually using that factory hardware. So we need to go ahead and remove those. We're first going to take a penetrating oil. We're going to come on the inside of the frame here. We're going to spray the 2 nuts there, let that soak in to help us loosen them. So now we're going to take a 13/16 inch wrench. If you have a ratcheting wrench, that'll make this a little bit easier. But we're going to grab on to either of those 2 bolts there. And we're probably going to have to use our whole body to break these free because they should be pretty tight. But once we do that, get a good leverage point here. We can start to loosen them. And there's what the nut on the back side looks like. So now that we have our old bolts removed and we're ready to reinstall our frame bracket, what you're going to need to do is, most likely, if you want to go ahead and just check now, go ahead and set the frame bracket into position and try to put your bolt through the holes there. However, chances are you're going to be hitting on this leaf spring, so you're not going to be able to get the bolt in. So what we need to do is we need to use our RV's landing gear, and we need to raise the rear of the motorhome here. But once you do that, you should be able to line up the holes in the bracket and reinstall your bolt. Now that we have both of our bolts in, we'll go ahead and reinstall our nuts. Now that we have our bracket in place, we have our hardware inserted, we can go ahead and tighten it down, rather torque it down to the specifications in our instructions. Now once we have both of those tight, we'll go ahead and just do this same thing over on the other side. So the next thing we need to do, we need to come under the motorhome here, locate our rear axle, and directly on the bottom of our rear axle you're going to see our tie plate here, along with our 2 U-bolts. So we're going to be starting on either side, it doesn't matter which one. It's going to be a good idea to go ahead and beforehand spray these down with a penetrating oil, similar to how we did with the cross member bolts. So we want to let that set a little bit, it's going to make these a lot easier to break free. Once we've done that, we're going to take a 1 5/16 inch socket. We're going to begin removing each of these 4 nuts here. Now, if yours is anything like ours, you're actually going to want a hammer nearby because that socket is going to be a super tight fit on there, most likely due to the rust on the outside of the nut. So we're going to hammer it on there, and then if you have an impact, that's definitely going to help you for this next step as well, because you need to begin removing these nuts. And now we'll just simply repeat that same process there for our other 3 nuts. So now that we have all of our nuts loose, we can go ahead and take our axle plate here. We're going to have 2 of these in our kit. They're going to be identical. It does matter, however, which way we orient them. So we want the wing here, the flange, whatever you want to call it, we want that facing the rear of the motorhome. We also want it facing the inside like so. But once we have the correct orientation, we'll simply just go ahead, place it up into position, and then we can re-secure it using the factory hardware. I'm just going to use one of these nuts here to hold it in place, because you're going to have a little bit of issues when you're trying to push that plate on there, because it's going to be pushing the U-bolts up, so you're not going to get enough bolt here to thread your nut on. So we're just going to get one to start, and then we can actually take a hammer, or if you just want to do it by hand, but basically just push this plate up onto the U-bolt until we get enough thread through that we can place our flat washer on with our other nut. And once we have all of our bolts started, we'll come back with our impact, and we'll go ahead and tighten them down. We want to make sure that we alternate side to side and front to back so that we tighten the U-bolts evenly. Now we'll go ahead and take our torque wrench here and torque everything down to spec. So the next thing we're going to be doing is actually outside the RV here. We're going to take our anti-sway bar along with our bushings. We're just going to do some pre-assembly here. So we're going to make sure we get a set of gloves, some paper towels. Then we're going to take the included grease here in our kit. Just going to take a little bit out. And basically I'm just going to be lining the inside of our bushing here as best we can. And we don't need a ton in there, but we do want to make sure it is completely coated. And once we get it pretty well coated, we're actually going to go ahead and just place it on the actual sway bar here. Now we don't have an exact location yet, we won't know that till we get under there, but around in this area here, a couple inches away from the curve, should be pretty close to where we want it. Now we'll just do this for the other side as well. So now that we have our bushings on, we'll go ahead and take one of our brackets and just insert it over the bushing like so. Then we're going to grab some hardware, take our anti-sway bar, and head on back underneath the RV. So now the next thing we're going to do, once we have the anti-sway bar underneath our RV here, we're going to come to our axle brackets. We're going to install some hardware on there. I'm going to take 2 of the smaller bolts with our flat washer. We'll be placing these in the first and the third hole. I'll do that on both sides. So now with an extra set of hands, we can go ahead and pick our sway bar up and set it into position. So we'll go ahead and get one nut started, and then we'll go ahead and remove the other one so we can install our flat washer, and then we'll have to remove this nut again as well so we can get another flat washer in there. So now we're ready to take our end link here. So we're going to have two different sets of adjustment holes on the frame bracket, and then three different sets here on the end link. So the reason for this is we need to get the anti-sway bar as level as possible. So depending on your particular application, you may need to use a different set of adjustment holes, but it's pretty easy. We're basically just going to hold it up, sort of eyeball it level. So we'll place this end of our end link in the frame bracket. I'm going to be using the bottom hole here as a reference. We'll stick one of our 5/8 inch bolts through to secure it. And then we can go ahead and just eyeball where we need to make the adjustment hole here to keep our sway bar level. So it looks like for our particular application, that center hole there, hold it up there just to show you, that's going to keep our sway bar pretty level. So we're going to be using the middle hole here on the bottom of the end link, and then the bottom hole in our frame bracket. But again, each situation could be a little bit differently, so make sure you just mock everything up beforehand. Now that we have this side in, we'll just go ahead and repeat the same process on the other side. Don't forget to install your nuts once we push our bolts all the way through. So now we're ready to start torquing our hardware. We're going to start here with the frame clamps. We're going to torque these two nuts here to the amount specified in our instructions. In order to do this, we'll need a 5/8 inch open wrench, and then we're going to need an 11/16 inch socket. So now for our two 5/8 inch bolts here, we'll go ahead and tighten those down. Keep in mind they don't have a torque spec. We're just going to tighten them until the bushings compress. We'll be using a 15/16 inch socket for this. So now once we have everything tightened down, we'll simply just jump on over to the other side and repeat that same process. And that's going to do it today for our look and installation of the Roadmaster Rear Anti-Sway Bar here on our 2017 Newmar Canyon Star.